Ryerson City Building Institute. We're pretty new, we're about a year and a half old. If you're not familiar with the Institute, we do research, teaching, communications, and engagement on urban issues in the Greater Toronto region. And one of our big focuses is on the key theme of convergence. And we really focus on how to bring in different disciplines and different ideas to create new solutions to tricky urban policy problems in the region. So I'm going to pass it over to Ken to do the first portion, and yeah, hope you enjoy.
Okay, I guess I advance the slides here.
Yeah, you can use this, Ken.
Oh, okay. So I am privileged to be one of the co-founders of the City Building Institute, and we are really happy to be at Ryerson. Ryerson seems the ideal place to have conversations about what our city is becoming, how we influence it, and among other things, how we use technology. And so we were really pleased to have this invitation to speak to this extraordinary audience. I'm really impressed by all the different things that people are doing. And we are all about dialogue. We're really all about raising difficult issues and engaging a lot of people in conversations. And so we want to take the opportunity tonight to talk about how technology is shaping our cities, how can it shape our cities, how should it shape our cities. And in order to start the conversation, I'm going to show you two slides, and I'm first going to toggle back and forth between them, and then say a few words about them. So this is the first slide. Whoops. This is the second slide. So this slide was taken not long ago in Palo Alto, right in the heart of Silicon Valley, in a Starbucks. And the people sitting there are there in the way that you see them because of two technological revolutions that occurred. The first one after World War II got everybody in their cars. So this is a place that virtually no one walks to. There's a big parking lot outside. It's in a neighborhood of small-scale streets, cul-de-sacs. Every dwelling has a fleet of automobiles for pretty much every adult. And so people leave their homes. They all, by the way, I'm sure, have fancy espresso machines, and they have all these devices. They could be sitting at home doing what they're doing there, but they come to the Starbucks, and I took this picture looking at this wall, but I could have taken that same picture in any part of the Starbucks. All of the tables are designed for one person. They are everybody there with there was one person reading a newspaper, but every other single person in the Starbucks, aside from the baristas who were serving takeout, was on a laptop or a phone, as you see them, absorbed in not being there with the other people in the Starbucks. This is an image which in many ways has the same ingredients. It has a coffee machine, it has tables and chairs, but in this case, it's about people who are actually talking to each other, looking at each other. And so this is a really interesting, raises some really interesting questions about the use of technology and what it is doing to us. Now, the next thing that's really interesting about this is I put this image on Twitter, and I put the question, is this the kind of life we want in public? And I got a lot of really interesting reactions, and most people said no. But when I raised the same question for the people I was with in Palo Alto, what they said was, and what's your point? because for them, this is the new normal. This is how people live, and they couldn't imagine living like this. So that, I want to just leave that there, and I'd love to have, as we get into the discussion, your reactions to what this is telling us. So this is a kind of lead-in to a discussion, and clearly technology is doing amazing things for us. It has the opportunity to make the city understandable to us in all kinds of extraordinary ways. This happens to be a device on somebody's phone which is telling them when subways are arriving and how they navigate the city. Extraordinarily useful. We had Murmur in Toronto, which I think Gabe had something to do with, which is incredible because this has, if you go to these Murmur signs, this was done quite a while ago, but there's a phone number, you call the phone number and you can actually have a voice telling you the history of a particular place, what happened there, why it's interesting. It's a wonderful use of technology which makes the city a more interesting place. So the question we want to raise with you, and I think this is particularly appropriate for civic tech, is how do we make judgments about the use of technology, not blindly accept it, use it appropriately, use it discerningly, with an eye to social equity, with an eye to sustainability, with an eye to the kind of civic values we want to bring to the use of technology. This is the kind of joke that was done in Washington, D.C. You can see a sidewalk with 2 lanes, cell phone users on the right, who are obviously not looking at each other, bumping into each other, and people without cell phones on the left. It makes an interesting point. I'm sure you've all had the experience of walking down the sidewalk and people obviously not making eye contact, but not even acknowledging each other's presence as they walk by, all on their devices. This is an incredibly important discussion for us now because we are in the early stages, as you all know better than I do, of a tsunami of technological innovations. It's happening daily. It's about making decisions about emerging technologies. For example, the whole issue of Uber that we've been dealing with, or Airbnb, or any of these sharing systems. Should we be proactively anticipating their arrival and thinking in advance about how we want to use them rather than waiting until they provoke crises? Is disruption and the kinds of things that it brings and all of the conflicts and so on the only way to deal with that? Or are there some things that are on the horizon that we should be thinking about in advance? This quote kind of captures it. Technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. If you think of that startup...
That's me.
That's you. Well, there you go. It's a great quote.
No, the picture. No.
Oh. Yes. You should have done the quote as well. So this is what you are all about, and this is why we thought it was so great to have this invitation to come and talk to you. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Claire to talk about some of the things we're doing in this space.
Thank you. Hi. So, in the same way that Civic Tech is working on trying to find those solutions to those tricky problems, that's something that we're trying to do at the City Building Institute as well. And one of our projects related to that is the driverless cars in city building work that we're doing. Last week we had a big meetup event. We actually held it right downstairs here in this building. And it was moderated by Steve Pakin, and he was there to really ask the tough questions. What we're trying to explore is how do we get to the kind of city that is dense and transit-oriented and livable and sustainable and equitable in the presence or the impending presence of driverless cars. And the questions we're really thinking about is how can policy and planning be tools to usher in the future that we want with driverless cars. And that includes thinking about issues around the last mile, about ride sharing, about how driverless cars can facilitate intensification rather than sprawl. So we had 9 panelists at this event, and they represented a huge range of fields, from transportation planning to urban planning to research. There were elected officials, futurists. It was a huge, someone from Brookfield, Jesse. It was a huge range. And we think that was really what pushed the conversation forward. Rather than just asking questions, we were trying to figure out some answers or what comes next. So to start that conversation, we produced a video, which we're going to show you now, and it kind of helps to introduce the key questions and frame the conversations.
At the turn of the last century, our cities transformed dramatically because we began redesigning them around the personal vehicle. We're on the cusp of a similar change.
Autonomous vehicles represent an unknown. They could be beneficial to society or they could be detrimental.
Will this technology help to reduce the number of cars on the road? Will it reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Will it help to support transit?
Autonomous vehicles have the potential to dramatically transform how public transit operates across the country. If you could imagine a fleet of autonomous vehicles in a city that are available at a relatively low cost to take somebody from point A to point B, that's a transformative opportunity for public transit.
Buses, with a little help from technology, can be redeployed to axes where we would have demand and where they could be a lot more effective and efficient.
The automobile, more than anything else, changed our land use patterns, not necessarily for the good. It has led to urban sprawl, low-density development, and a lot of highways and cars on the road, and now we're facing a lot of congestion and long commutes.
It's great for you to be able to live in the countryside and commute downtown. It's great for you and your friends to discover this new restaurant that's 15 kilometers away and start the party in the car. But it turns into a dystopia when everybody else has the same idea at the same time.
We already know the long commute stinks. So why would we use autonomous vehicles to promote something that we know already doesn't work? This is where the alignment between introducing this new technology and our city building objectives really becomes so critical. What kind of cities do we want, and how can autonomous vehicles help us get there?
If done properly, and if we think about these issues correctly, we could completely transform our urban areas where cars are really just an implementation tool that we don't notice as much. They're in the background.
If you have great public transit, you have car share opportunities, and when you need a car, you can just dial it up and it'll show up in front of your house. Why would you bother owning a car? And if you don't need to own that car, we don't need to be parking cars all over our city. So we can start redesigning our main streets. We can redesign our condos in the downtown.
So the question for us now is, where is Canada going to land on this? Are we going to be a thoughtful, proactive jurisdiction, or are we going to be a reactive jurisdiction that makes decisions in haste? We've seen in the case of Uber and the sharing economy that waiting and reacting is going to lead to confusion, it's going to lead to protest.
I think it's critical that we plan proactively to make sure that autonomous vehicles and on-demand ride sharing work for us rather than having this technology happen to us when we're not looking or we're not paying attention.
They can either enhance where we're seeking to go with our cities, or they can detract from where we're seeking to go with our cities. And at the end of the day, that's a choice we make.
framed the conversation, and if you're interested, you can watch the full webcast of the event. We'll also be doing some more work on this topic in the coming months. This is a photo of kind of what it was like. I think the way that we plan the event, in the same way that you guys really focus on creating events where people can connect with one another, we tried to shape the event in the same way. We had participants completely surrounding the panel on all sides. There was crosstalk going on between the panelists. People could ask questions throughout the event. We hosted it downstairs in a venue where people could look out the window onto Yonge Street, onto Gould Street, look out onto the city, and anyone could come into the event. It's a public space and just happen upon it and listen for as long as they'd like. So that's all we have for you today. Maybe I'll leave it to Ken to wrap up, and then we're really looking forward to chatting with you more.
So I won't say much more. I think we really wanted to put this bigger question on the table in this audience, which is the purpose. Since you all, or many of you, are involved in technology as a primary focus, and to put the kind of societal decisions and challenges that this raises on the table. And we very much look forward to having a lively discussion with you, getting your reactions, getting your thoughts on what this means for all of us, how we deal with it, what it portends for the future of our city. So I'm not sure how we want to structure this as a conversation.
Well, we have time for a few short Q&A, so does anyone have any questions? Okay.
One of the many things I've heard about the driverless car, which is, I gather, coming in like 10 or 15 years, probably be fairly common, is that it could disrupt, I've heard estimates up to 30% of the economy, like in pretty major ways. There are all those drivers, there are all those garages and so on and so forth. Have you factored that into how that might affect the city?
Well, when you say have we factored it in, it's not as if we're doing it. We're actually tracking something that is here.
But is that part of your planning process?
Well, it's one of the huge issues. The repercussions are endless. Yeah. I mean, in terms of people who are employed, insurance industry, all of the car, I mean, the automobile industry, everybody is scrambling to figure this out. There are two groups of people in particular who are moving very fast on this. One is the automobile manufacturers, and the other is the tech companies. And they're doing it with different business models, different plans. I think one of the biggest questions, which goes to the kind of conundrum that Charisse Berta, our director, pointed out in the movie, is imagine two simple scenarios. One, the vehicles are sold to individuals with the idea of simply extending a way of life, which has become problematic with the internal combustion engine, and something that would actually exacerbate sprawl. It would make sprawl easier. The other scenario, an entirely different one, is we move away from private ownership. There are fleets of these vehicles which are a service, not owned by people, and they're combined with transit systems. So they do the proverbial last kilometer, first kilometer. Imagine people living in suburbs now who would have a way of getting to transit as opposed to making long trips on highways. So I mean, the huge questions and public policy questions, and I think it's fair to say that most cities are barely acknowledging what this will mean. For example, we're still busily, when the point was made about parking, all of our bylaws are still requiring people to build parking spaces in buildings. Those parking spaces, whether they're below grade or they're in structures or they're on-street parking, will click with one way or another, they're going to become obsolete.
Or the Gardner decision.
For example. So I think this is a kind of call to action for people to become conscious of the choices. I think that's our our real point. If we have a point of view here, become conscious of the choices, and so we don't end up with collateral damage because we haven't figured out what this could mean or even try to anticipate what it could mean.
We'll have time for 2 more quick questions.
Just a quick question. What has been the reaction from suburbia who love their car?
Well, suburbia doesn't have a voice. People who do have a voice, which is really interesting, is the generation that most of you represent, which is trying to get out from under the burden of long commutes and living in places where you can't walk to do things. So we have kind of astonishing statistics emerging now. In North America, between age 16 and age 34, 26% of that group do not have driver's licenses and have no intention of getting them. We're seeing cities across North America, even in the US, for example, not on the coast, but actually in the Midwest and the Southwest, growing. The city centers are growing to population densities that are reaching or exceeding their historic highs, because young people are really trying to move into places where they have walkability.
But is that still true for the young people in suburbia that they're not getting their driver's license?
Well, we have another problem, and we have this in Toronto in the 905 and in the 416. We have, because of cities are seen as so much more desirable, real estate in the pre-war city of Toronto is so much more valuable than real estate on the fringe. We have this population dislocation where we're exporting poverty to the suburbs. And we're now putting lots of people living in places that were designed around the automobile who don't have cars and who don't have adequate transit and don't have access to jobs and to simple things like buying groceries or daycare or all of those other things. So along comes this new technology, and the question is, who will it serve? How will it serve them? What will it do to make life better for most people? And how can we shape the use of the technology through proactive things that governments may do, through policy, through interventions, in order to use the technology to deal with some of the problems and opportunities that are on the horizon.
One last question. Stand up first. Sorry.
So today, for example, Car2Go is trying to get in Toronto on the street parking, right? And they're facing opposition from the City Hall, right? The only jurisdiction in North America that doesn't allow this, right? So if we're talking about parking, right, and a typical Car2Go car is used, not typical, but sometimes 10, 15 times a day, right? Why, it seems to me that the City Hall is not embracing that initiative as aggressively or as progressively as they could. Is there some thinking that goes behind that, or like what is stopping us from taking that steps, and what are the considerations about the true cost of using public space, such as a parking lot or side of the street?
Okay. Two of the people who were in the movie are top civil servants in Toronto dealing with this issue. So you have Stephen Buckley, who's the head of transportation, and you have Jennifer Giesman, our chief planner. So I think it would be fair to say that at the highest level, in terms of talking about ideas, there's a dawning consciousness of how dramatic this shift, this particular thing. And by the way, this is just one of a whole array of technologies that are on the horizon that are disruptive. But when you get into the actual regulations and practices and sort of daily decisions that are being made, there's a huge time lag and an enormous inertia. And so I think I think the people in the video, and I did that initially with the Starbucks image, made allusion to what happened after World War II, where there was this euphoria about the automobile, and the auto manufacturers and people who were selling gasoline and making tires. To give you an example, they intervened and they bought up all the streetcar lines all across North America and ripped them out. They basically decided, and everybody else went along with the program, and Dwight Eisenhower, when he was president of the US, built 46,000 miles of interstate highways. No one questioned. Very few people questioned where this was all going. Everybody just drank the Kool-Aid. And I think what we're trying to say through this work at the City Building Institute is there is a lot going on which is going to change our lives in profound ways, which is going to change our cities in profound ways. And it can be for good, obviously, and it can be doing a lot of evil things. And we really have to, we're trying to promote people doing what you're asking for, which is to understand what this could mean, to get ahead of the curve, to really think about it, and to try to use the inevitability of the technology in constructive ways.
Well, thank you. Some real good food for thought.
Is there anything we can do to help?
Okay.
I think you can do everything to help. I think, you know, one of the things that's exciting for us about being in front of this audience is you are, you know, whether you're technology developers, whether you're people who are inventing various aspects of this technology, who are deploying it, who are commercializing it, and all the different ways that when you were introducing yourselves that you were describing your involvement, you are a powerful force potentially, particularly if you're operating not just individually, but if there's some kind of collective effort to say there's a value-laden dimension to this, and to support efforts, and I'm not even sure how to tell you how to do this, but to raise the issues and try to find channels and ways of raising public awareness about the possibilities, both good and bad, and coming up with ideas in which policy can be shaped to achieve desirable outcomes. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, and on that note, thank you once again to our speakers. Definitely lots of food for thought as we